Christmas morning in the small town of Millhaven looked like something out of a postcard. Snow blanketed the streets in a pristine white cover, while wreaths adorned doors, and twinkling lights glowed in the windows of the houses. At Nora Whitman's home, a cozy wooden cabin at the end of the main street, the smell of freshly baked cookies mingled with the soft sound of Christmas carols. Nora was in the kitchen, focused on preparing the special breakfast she had planned for herself and Everett. Pancakes decorated with star-shaped red fruits, a pitcher of fresh orange juice, and a small pile of carefully wrapped presents awaited on the living room table. Everett, with his usual charm, adjusted the ornaments on the Christmas tree, making sure each one was in its perfect place. "That star needs to be more centered," he commented, laughing, as Nora watched him from the kitchen archway. For a moment, she smiled, as she often did when Everett managed to divert her thoughts. But the smile quickly faded, replaced by a concern she could not hide. As Everett moved around the room, she noticed a gesture that had become frequent. He discreetly watched her, almost assessing her every move. The morning passed peacefully until Nora received a message on her phone. The brief vibration on the table prompted her to pick it up quickly, reading its content before Everett noticed. But he did. His relaxed demeanor immediately changed, though he tried to mask his irritation with a casual tone. "Who was it?" he asked, adjusting a silver ornament. "Just a colleague wishing me Merry Christmas," Nora replied, trying to sound natural. But her hands trembled slightly as she placed the phone back on the table. Everett simply nodded, but his eyes lingered on her a few seconds longer than necessary. Nora averted her gaze, focusing on the dishes she was arranging. She knew every move she made was being scrutinized and that, even without words, Everett had his suspicions. After breakfast, friends and family began arriving for the traditional Christmas visits. Nora's home, usually filled with laughter and lively conversations, seemed oddly silent. Clara, Nora's closest friend, noticed something was off. "Are you okay, Nora? You seem worried," she asked while helping in the kitchen. "I'm just tired, you know how it is," Nora replied, forcing a smile. But Clara knew there was more to it. The way Nora avoided eye contact and how her voice seemed quieter than usual indicated something was wrong. Meanwhile, Everett was in the living room, entertaining the guests. He was the perfect host, smiling and keeping the conversations light, but always keeping a watchful eye on Nora. To outsiders, they appeared to be the ideal couple, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that there was an invisible tension between them. When the last guest said their goodbyes and the house was silent again, Nora let out a sigh of relief. But she knew the night was still ahead, along with the inevitable conversation she dreaded. As Nora closed the door behind the last guest, a chill ran down her spine. It wasn't the cold wind blowing in from outside but the certainty that Christmas, a time she had always loved, was on the verge of becoming something she would never forget. When the door closed behind the last visitor, Nora leaned against the cold wood, feeling the weight of the tension she had carried all day. She tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt heavy, laden with an imminent sense of danger. In the living room, Everett was picking up glasses left on the table with calm movements, but his silence was deafening. The truth was that Nora no longer knew how to coexist with the man who, 3 years earlier, had seemed like everything she had ever wanted. Everett, with his confidence and charm, had quickly won her heart, but in recent months, he had transformed into something unrecognizable, possessive, controlling, even threatening. As Nora gathered the dishes in the kitchen, recent memories began to flood her mind. A few weeks earlier, she had found hidden documents in Everett's office. They were strange financial reports, names she didn't recognize, and a history of legal cases he had never mentioned. Even more disturbing, she had discovered through an old acquaintance that Everett had been accused of violence in a previous relationship, though the case had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. After that, Nora began noticing patterns in his behavior. The way he asked seemingly innocent questions, always with an investigative tone. How he became uneasy whenever she left without notifying him in advance. The distrust was constant, suffocating. And now, on Christmas Day, she felt trapped, as if every step she took was being monitored. The sound of Everett's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're awfully quiet," he commented, walking into the kitchen with an expression she knew well, a superficial smile, but eyes that seemed to try to read her mind. "I'm just tired," Nora replied, keeping her eyes fixed on the dishes she was washing. But she knew he didn't believe her. Earlier, Clara's message had been brief but full of meaning. "Let me know when you're ready. I'm here." Nora knew Clara was her only ally. She had already shared the plan. After Christmas, she would break up with Everett and leave him forever. But for that to happen, she needed to survive the holiday. Everett approached, leaning against the counter beside her. "Who sent you a message earlier?" he asked, his voice laced with false casualness. "Clara, just wishing me Merry Christmas," Nora quickly said, without looking at him. She felt Everett's gaze, as if he were trying to find hesitation in her words. "You've been talking to her a lot lately," he remarked, crossing his arms. Nora knew every sentence of his was a trap, an invitation for her to slip up. So, she limited herself to a murmur while continuing to wash the dishes. After a long moment of silence, Everett left the kitchen. Nora exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, but her relief was short-lived. When she finished, she returned to the living room and found him with her phone in his hand. "You left this on the table," he said, but didn't immediately return it. Instead, he held it as if debating whether to open it. Nora felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you," she said, extending her hand to take it. For a moment, she thought he would question her again, but Everett simply handed her the phone and went upstairs. She knew time was running out. She needed to find a way out of the situation before something worse happened. That night, while Everett slept, Nora grabbed her phone and typed a quick message to Clara: "Something's wrong. I need to leave, but he's suspicious." She immediately deleted the message but almost froze when she heard a creak in the hallway. Everett was standing there, in the darkness, staring directly at her. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his tone low. Nora froze, trying to find the right words. "No. I'm just thinking about things I need to organize tomorrow," she replied, attempting to sound casual. Everett observed her for a long moment before returning to the bedroom. Nora knew she had to act quickly. Christmas, which used to bring comfort and joy, was now just a scene of terror for her. In the silence of the house, Nora closed her eyes, wishing for morning to bring an escape. But deep down, she knew that this Christmas night would be unlike any other, and perhaps, the last one she would live. The clock on the living room wall showed 7 p.m. as Nora began setting the table for dinner. The sight of lit candles and the twinkling lights on the Christmas tree should have warmed her heart, but all she felt was a constant chill that even the fireplace couldn't dispel. Everett was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone with a neutral expression. The apparent calmness was a game both knew well. Every gesture, every word carried an unspoken tension. Nora placed the plates on the table carefully, trying to act as if everything was normal. When she finished, she called Everett. "It's ready. Let's eat." He got up and walked to the table, looking at the perfectly decorated dishes. For a moment, Nora thought he might compliment her effort, but Everett simply pulled out a chair and sat down without saying anything. She sat across from him, and the sound of cutlery and plates filled the uncomfortable silence. It was Everett who finally broke the quiet. "So, Nora. You seemed nervous today. Is there something you want to tell me?" Nora's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "No, I was just worried about the guests and organizing everything. You know how I get when I want things to be perfect." Everett tilted his head, as if analyzing every word. "Of course, you're always so meticulous. But I noticed you got a lot of messages today. Clara again?" He threw the name like a knife across the table. "Yes, she just wanted to know how the day was going," Nora answered without looking up. Everett set his cutlery down and crossed his arms, his relaxed posture now replaced with something much more rigid. "Are you sure you're not hiding anything from me, Nora? Because if you are, I'd like to hear it from you now." His words hung over the table like an impending storm. Nora knew this was the moment she dreaded. If she lied, he would keep pressing. If she told the truth, what would he do? She took a deep breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. "Everett, I need to be honest with you." Her voice came out lower than she expected, but she continued. "I'm not happy. For some time now, I've felt trapped. I was planning to talk to you after the holidays, but I think I need to say it now." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Everett stared at her, his eyes burning with a mix of disbelief and anger. "Trapped?" he repeated, his voice rising. "I do everything for you, Nora. Everything. And this is how you repay me? Planning to leave me behind my back?" Nora raised her hands in a gesture of appeasement. "It's not that, Everett. I just need space. We both know things aren't working." But her words only fueled his anger. He stood up so quickly that his chair almost toppled over. "Space? This isn't about space, is it? Who is it, Nora? Who's the other person making you think this way?" "There's no one," she replied, her voice almost pleading. "Please, Everett, sit down. Let's talk like adults." But Everett didn't want to listen. His anger seemed to grow with each passing second, turning into something far more dangerous. He stepped toward her, and Nora instinctively backed away, panic taking hold. "You think you can just throw everything away? Years together? On Christmas?" His voice trembled, fists clenched. Nora tried to run, but Everett caught her arm with a firm grip. The struggle was brief, almost a blur. Nora tried to free herself, but Everett was out of control. In the heat of the moment, he grabbed the set of Christmas lights hanging from the tree and, in a desperate and unthinking act, wrapped them around Nora's neck. She fought back, but her strength soon waned until finally, the room fell silent. Everett collapsed to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he looked at what he had done. Nora's lifeless body lay beside the tree, the reflections of colorful lights dancing on her pale skin. For a moment, he couldn't move, his mind trying to process what had just happened. But then, cold logic took over. He needed to make it look like an accident. He needed to protect himself. Everett carried Nora's body to the couch, carefully positioning her, covering her with a blanket, and placing a glass of wine beside her. He adjusted the lights around her neck to make it seem like she had accidentally entangled herself while decorating. When he finished, he stepped back a few paces, observing the scene with glazed eyes. It looked almost convincing, but nothing could erase the guilt beginning to consume him. As Everett climbed the stairs to the bedroom, trying to escape the vision of what he had done, the world outside continued to celebrate Christmas. But inside that house, the glow of the lights and the sound of carols masked the darkness that was about to be uncovered. The next morning, the silence in Nora's house was broken only by the ticking of the clock in the living room. The snow continued to fall gently, covering Millhaven with a new layer of purity, in cruel contrast to what had happened the night before. Everett descended the stairs slowly, still trying to convince himself that everything was under control. But controlling others' perceptions would prove much harder. Nora had a well-established Christmas routine, and her absence wouldn't go unnoticed. Friends and family expected her at the annual community brunch in the town square. When she didn't show up, Clara was the first to sense something was wrong. "She's never late," Clara said, already worried, as she called Nora's phone. The ringing echoed several times, but no one answered. Determined to check on her, Clara drove to Nora's house. Upon arrival, she noticed the curtains were drawn, and no sound came from inside. Clara rang the doorbell repeatedly, but the door remained shut. Concerned, she walked around the house to the living room window and, pressing her face to the glass, saw something that made her heart stop, Nora, lying motionless on the couch, with Christmas lights around her neck. Clara wasted no time. She called the police immediately, and the first officers arrived within minutes. Everett, who was upstairs, heard the sound of sirens and firm footsteps on the porch. He opened the door, trying to look confused. "What's going on?" he asked, with a rehearsed expression of concern. The police explained they had received a call about a potential emergency. When they entered, the scene Everett had carefully staged seemed plausible at first glance. "Looks like an accident," one officer commented, looking at Nora on the couch. The lights, meticulously arranged, suggested she had accidentally tangled herself while decorating. Clara, however, wasn't convinced. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her eyes filled with tears. Nora wasn't careless. And why would she be decorating on the couch? She had finished everything yesterday. Clara's insistence caught the investigators' attention, prompting them to take a closer look. Small details in the scene seemed odd, the lights were too neatly arranged for an accident. Additionally, Nora's phone was found near the table, and deleted messages raised suspicions. The next day, the autopsy confirmed Clara's worst fears: the cause of death was manual asphyxiation before the Christmas lights had been applied. This immediately turned the case from an accident to a homicide. The investigation intensified, and Everett became the prime suspect. His explanation that he had gone upstairs to sleep and found Nora on the couch in the morning did not convince investigators. Nora's message history also revealed her conversations with Clara, highlighting her growing fear and her plan to end the relationship. Each detail painted a clear picture: Everett was not a loving partner but a controlling man who had lost control. Everett's fingerprints on the Christmas lights were the final piece of evidence the investigators needed. He was brought in for questioning, where he tried to stick to his version of events. However, after hours of interrogation, the weight of guilt and the mounting evidence caused him to break down. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said, tears streaming down his face. I couldn't stand the thought of losing her." With Everett's confession, the case was resolved. The town of Millhaven was left in shock upon learning that the man who had appeared to be Nora's perfect partner was, in reality, the one responsible for her death. As Everett faced the consequences of his actions, the small town of Millhaven tried to cope with the loss of Nora. For those who loved her, Christmas would never be the same. With Everett's confession, he was immediately charged with second-degree murder, a classification often applied to crimes committed in a moment of impulse, without premeditation, but with clear intent to cause fatal harm. During the trial, the prosecution highlighted Everett's controlling behavior and evidence of his abusive tendencies, arguing that the crime was the tragic culmination of months of emotional manipulation. In the state where the case was tried, sentences for second-degree murder vary, but given the severity of the circumstances, Everett was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. During the trial, Clara was called to testify. She presented messages exchanged with Nora in the weeks leading up to her death, detailing the growing fear her friend had felt. She was trying to leave a relationship that was suffocating her, Clara said, her voice breaking. She just didn't have enough time. The prosecution also used the messages and Clara's testimony to draw attention to patterns of abusive relationships, educating the public on the importance of recognizing these signs. Everett's defense, on the other hand, argued that he acted in a moment of desperation and attempted to downplay his culpability, claiming there was no premeditation involved. Despite the defense's attempts, the jury took only a few hours to reach a guilty verdict. During the sentencing, Everett expressed remorse. "I loved her," he said, his voice trembling. "But now I see that my love was selfish. I took something precious away, and I can never undo that."